Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you're navigating the modern world, it's hard to miss something our sources point out immediately.
Yeah.
It is just relentlessly loud out there.
It really is. And not just, traffic or construction noise. It's the sound of constant engagement. Everyone's talking, posting, shouting opinions online.
Yeah.
And the paradox we're really digging into today is, well, everyone's talking, but it feels like very few people are actually truly listening.
That's it, isn't it?
Wow.
Real silence, actual quiet, it's become incredibly rare. And we don't just mean turning off the music for a second. We're talking about silence as a state of mind.
Mm-hmm.
So our mission today is to unpack these sources that see silence completely differently, not as emptiness or, lack of something, but as a real source of power, peace, and maybe even wisdom.
Yeah, we're treating it like an active resource, almost like a nutrient your mind needs. We want to explore the psychological reasons we avoid it, but also the social and, yes, even spiritual benefits the sources say come from embracing it and why it's worth protecting.
Because really, if you boil down all the material, the message is pretty clear. Silence is, it's where peace lives.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the big question we have to tackle first. If silence is so restorative, so good for us, why do we seem to actively run away from it? Let's get into that resistance.
It seems to be a kind of fundamental defense mechanism against ourselves almost. We get really good at filling every single spare moment with noise music, scrolling through feeds, endless chatter, even just the pressure to look busy.
Right.
And it's not usually accidental. It's often driven by this low-level anxiety, isn't it? Like
Sure.
FOMO, fear of missing out, or that constant workplace need to seem productive, seem engaged.
That pressure to appear productive. Yeah. That's interesting. So you're saying the background noise, maybe a podcast or just scrolling, it acts like a kind of digital shield.
Exactly. A shield against what? Well, the core reason seems to be that silence really forces us to face our own thoughts. It strips away all the external stuff, the performance, and suddenly it's just you, alone with your mind. And honestly, for a lot of people, that's scary territory. We use noise like a buffer to avoid maybe difficult feelings or questions we've been putting off, maybe some uncomfortable truths about where we are in life.
So if these sources have it right, all this background chatter isn't just distraction. It's almost like a socially acceptable way to avoid ourselves. But how do we know if we're really avoiding thoughts or just, naturally distracted by a busy world?
I think it comes down to the compulsion. That immediate reflex, the second things go quiet, you reach for the phone, you turn something on.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
When you look at it that way, the noise filling really does look like an escape mechanism, an attempt to manage all the chaos we feel from the outside world. But here's the beautiful flip side our sources offer. You don't actually need to escape the world. You just need to silence it for a while. The problem isn't necessarily that the world is too loud. It's more that we lack the inner quiet needed to actually process it all effectively.
That feels like a really crucial shift in perspective. We're not saying you need to, pack up and move to a mountaintop.
No, not it.
It's more about installing like a small, deliberate pause button in your day-to-day life and maybe challenging that deep-seated idea that silence is just empty space.
Passive.
That's the pivot right there. Because as long as you see silence as a void, naturally you're going to want to fill it up. But the material we looked at offers this big aha moment. It argues the complete opposite.
Which is?
Silence isn't emptiness at all. It's absolutely full of answers.
Okay, full of answers. How so? What kind of answers?
Well, when you finally manage to pause that constant external input, you start to hear things that were just drowned out before by the sheer cognitive load we all carry now.
Can you give an example? Like what typically gets drowned out? Is it always, deep spiritual stuff, or can it be practical too? Oh, it's definitely both. First and foremost, you start hearing yourself, your actual intuition, that feeling of what's genuinely right for you, your heart, your gut, whatever you want to call it, without it being filtered through everyone else's opinions or expectations.
Okay. Like an internal feedback loop we normally ignore.
Exactly. We're always inputting data, rarely listening to our own processing. Now, about the spiritual side, when the sources talk about hearing, say, God's whispers or similar concepts, it often points towards connecting with your deepest values, your moral core, your essential self-knowledge. And that's what gets lost in the constant reactivity.
You know, for our listeners, often dealing with complex choices, tons of information, the practical value of just getting clear seems huge. How does silence actually help with making better decisions, maybe faster?
Well, it directly tackles what we could call mental chaos. You know, mental clutter is just having too many thoughts flying around. Mental chaos is when you have too many priorities battling for your attention. That leads straight to decision fatigue. So moments of real silence, they don't just quiet the external noise, they help filter your internal stream. They let you distinguish between the urgent shouting and the actually important signal.
Right.
By cutting down that ambient mental load, you basically give your brain the processing power back. Power it needs to see what really matters, cutting right through that feeling of being overwhelmed.
So silence isn't some kind of luxury. It's more like essential cognitive maintenance.
Yeah.
It's the quickest way back to clarity when you feel paralyzed by too many options.
Precisely, yeah. If you're drowning in information, the absolute worst thing you can do is seek more information. The best thing. Often it's to silence the inputs out a bit and just process what you've already got.
Okay, that really clarifies the personal internal side. But let's shift gears. What happens when we take that quiet discipline and bring it into how we interact with other people? This is where it gets interesting because silence stops being a retreat and starts becoming, a tool.
Yeah, this part was surprising, wasn't it? Silence here becomes a very active choice. Our sources kept emphasizing that sometimes silence really does speak louder than words, but maybe not in the way we usually think about it, not like giving someone the silent treatment, but through deliberate non-reaction.
Okay, but isn't there a risk there that people might misunderstand your silence, think you're being passive or maybe even aggressive or just checked out? How do the sources differentiate that kind of powerful quiet from just shutting down?
That distinction is absolutely key. Shutting down is usually reactive, you're overwhelmed or withdrawing. Choosing silence in this context is proactive. It's a decision.
Okay.
And the core behavioral insight seems to be stopping that immediate urge to jump in, to react verbally. When you choose that pause, when you resist the need to instantly defend yourself or justify something, or even just offer your opinion, something quite remarkable happens.
Which is?
Other people often reveal who they really are.
So silence acts like a kind of mirror.
Exactly like a mirror. If someone's looking for a fight or needs constant validation, and you simply listen without feeding into it, without getting defensive, well, you force them to sort of sit with their own statement. Your lack of emotional fuel forces them to either reflect or maybe just double down on their own energy, which tells you a lot. You get much clearer data about them and the situation.
I think we've all been there, right? In conversations where you feel that almost physical pull to interrupt, to correct someone, prove your point.
Oh, absolutely.
And the sources are saying basically resist that urge and you'll actually find more peace.
It seems so. When you stop chasing the noise, the petty arguments, the need to weigh in on every little thing, defending every choice the sources suggest peace actually finds you, it's less about actively pursuing calm and more about setting up the internal boundaries that naturally create it.
It's true. We're sort of conditioned, aren't we? To believe we have to have an opinion on everything that's trending and we have to push back immediately against any criticism.
It's completely unsustainable, and the reality these sources point to is actually quite liberating. You really don't have to respond to everything. You don't have to win every argument or prove yourself constantly.
Right.
Peace starts. Like the moment you consciously choose silence over that knee-jerk reaction, that choice, that boundary, it's like reclaiming mental territory from the world's constant demands.
Okay, we've covered silence as psychologically necessary and as a surprisingly effective social strategy. But let's zoom out a bit. What about its role in, say, history or wisdom traditions? This isn't just some modern life hack, is it?
No, not at all. It's foundational. We need to shift here from thinking about it as just a tactic to seeing it as part of, wisdom itself. And the core conclusion from the material we reviewed was pretty unambiguous on this.
Yeah, that was.
Silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom.
Okay, silence is wisdom. What's the difference? It seems subtle, but probably huge, between seeing a pause as weak versus seeing it as wise.
Yeah, it's huge. Viewing silence as weakness implies you can't respond. Maybe you don't know what to say, or you're afraid. It feels like a lack. Viewing it as wisdom means you're choosing not to respond immediately. It implies self-control, confidence, the ability to see a bigger picture. You pause because you understand the potential cost of a rushed, emotional reaction. It's a higher order choice.
And the sources connect this kind of deep quiet to something. Well, bigger than just personal gain, right?
Absolutely. There's a definite spiritual or, let's say, existential dimension that comes through strongly. The idea is that silence connects us whether you frame it as connecting to the creator or to the universe or simply to the deepest truths of existence. It implies that the highest levels of understanding, real clarity, maybe even guidance, they require that intentional pause, that stepping back from the immediate sensory world.
And this practice, this deliberate retreat into reflection, we see it throughout history, don't we?
Yeah.
Used by people making incredibly profound decisions.
Yeah.
It's an ancient and frankly revered practice. The sources specifically brought up the example of the prophet, peace be upon him, who would famously retreat into silence for reflection.
Right.
And the lesson there is powerful. These weren't just, nice breaks. They were strategic withdrawals. They allowed him to step away from the intense pressures and distractions of daily life, of leadership, to process complex ethical questions, to connect deeply, and ultimately to formulate clear, decisive action.
So it wasn't just contemplation for its own sake. It was introspection for action, for guidance. It really underlines that point that major decisions, real leadership, often require getting away from the noise of the crowd.
Exactly. You need separation for introspection. You can't really hear your internal compass if you're constantly being bumped and pushed by external demands. So if we pull all these threads together now, the psychological need, the social power, the spiritual connection, how should we ultimately think about this thing we call silence?
It definitely sounds much more active than we usually assume.
It really is. That's the critical shift. It's not about doing nothing. That's the big misconception.
Yeah.
Our sources define it much more beautifully, I think, as doing something deeper. Listening, feeling, understanding. It's an active, deliberate pursuit. A choice to engage with what's fundamental, what's true, instead of just what's momentary and loud. You're actively cultivating the space for insight to emerge.
The idea of active listening, deeper understanding, that really sums up our deep dive today, doesn't it? You take one thing away, maybe it's that profound sense of peace and clarity you can get just by choosing the pause, and maybe that surprising power that comes from simply not reacting to every single thing.
Yeah, and remember that point we started with about using noise to escape, to avoid facing things. We kind of flipped that, suggesting you don't need to escape the world. You just need the ability to silence it sometimes internally.
So what's the final thought we want to leave with you, our listener, something to chew on?
Maybe consider this. What piece of really critical information, or maybe a truth about yourself or your goals or just your current situation, what might you be drowning out right now with constant noise? Think about your day ahead.
Yeah.
Is there one small, deliberate, distraction-free moment of silence you could actually claim? Just 5 minutes, maybe. Put the phone down during lunch. Turn the radio off for part of your commute. What deeper understanding, what clearer path might you finally access if you just gave quiet a chance? Because, as our sources suggest, that's probably where the answers are waiting.